Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to kind of dig into something we all kind of encounter every day, right? That delicate dance between like truth and how we communicate.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's one of those areas that really makes you think. We often see honesty as this black and white thing, but you know what? Our sources today are really suggesting that there's way more nuance to it than we might think.
It's so true. And, getting into this stuff for this deep dive really got me thinking it's not about, going out there and being dishonest, but more about recognizing how even those little like tiny untruths can really kind of have a ripple effect.
Yeah.
They can really impact things in a way we don't expect.
You hit the nail on the head. And it really just brings home how important it is to be super aware of how we communicate. I mean, yeah, honesty is like the foundation of trust, right? But sometimes to navigate those tricky situations, you need a slightly, I guess, a more strategic approach.
It's like what our sources were saying about that whole hairstyle example. Like
Yeah.
sometimes kindness just has to come first, even before brutal honesty, especially when you're trying to keep those relationships strong. I mean, let's be real. We've all been there, haven't we?
Yeah.
You want to be supportive
Yeah.
even if you're not exactly loving your friend's new look.
Oh, 100%. It's like a classic example of how a little white lie can just smooth things over when things could get awkward. But what really got me was what the source said about, how truth has a lasting effect while dishonesty sort of fades away. It makes you think, right?
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? It makes you wonder if, like, those tiny fibs, even when you mean well, could actually wear away at trust over time. Kind of like uh, building a house on a foundation that's not quite solid.
Exactly. And that's where that whole idea of authenticity comes into play, right? Like being genuine, even when it's tough, tends to have a way more positive impact down the line.
It's interesting because our sources bring up this idea of a wise individual, someone who uses communication, like strategically, to try and bring about good outcomes. Like imagine helping friends who have had a falling out patch things up.
Oh, that's a fascinating concept. And, it's not about manipulating people, but more like skillfully steering the conversation towards something positive. It's almost like what they called it truth judo.
I love that. Truth
No.
judo. Like you're not lying, but you're using the truth in a smart way
Oh,
to kind of nudge things in a good direction.
exactly. It shows how powerful communication can be, right? Like it shapes how people see things and can really influence how things turn out in the end.
So how do we become more like that wise individual in our own lives,
Yeah.
Because our sources actually give us some pretty practical steps.
Oh, yeah, they do. And the first one is so simple, but it's huge. Pause and reflect before you say anything. It's easy to just blurt things out, right?
Yeah.
But taking a second to think about how your words might land can make a world of difference.
Oh, it's so true. Like that old saying, think before you speak, right? Sometimes we all need a moment to choose our words carefully, especially when things are, delicate.
Absolutely. And another key thing is remembering who you're talking to. What's their headspace like? Are there any sensitive spots? Putting yourself in their shoes helps you tailor your words so they don't cause harm but actually help people understand.
That reminds me of that restaurant example from our sources. Sometimes giving someone advice they didn't ask for can do more harm than good, especially if they're already going through something tough.
Oh, it's a perfect example of how context is everything. Sometimes even well-meaning, honest feedback can be really hurtful if it's delivered at the wrong time.
Yeah, it's like throwing gasoline on a fire instead of like,
Yeah.
helping to put it out with some understanding and support.
Exactly. Our sources really stress the importance of asking yourself, what does this person need right now? Maybe it's just someone to listen, a shoulder to cry on, or simply knowing that their feelings are valid.
It's all about meeting people where they are emotionally and offering the kind of support that truly fits their needs in that moment.
That's it. And sometimes the best thing you can do is resist jumping in with solutions and just be there, with empathy and presence.
So we've got pause and reflect and consider the receiver. What comes next?
Well, the next step is to focus on what you want to achieve with your communication. What's your goal? Are you trying to help, build a connection, or just express yourself authentically? When you're clear about your intentions, choosing the right words becomes a lot easier.
That really clicks for me. It's like having a compass, making sure your communication is heading in the right direction. Actually, want to know a little secret? All this amazing wisdom we're talking about, it's actually from a fantastic book called 365 Daily Messages for You. It's packed with insights like these on navigating life with more wisdom and kindness. You can find a link in the description if you'd like to check it out. But for now, back to our deep dive. What's the final step to becoming a more mindful communicator?
I'd say the most important one, choose kindness. It's not about hiding your truth, but about expressing it in a way that minimizes harm and makes it easier for people to understand.
I love that. It's a beautiful reminder that even when we're dealing with tough topics or disagreements, we can still choose to approach those conversations with compassion.
Exactly. It's not about being all sugary sweet or avoiding difficult conversations. It's about realizing our words have power and using that power for good.
So much of this reminds me of that truth judo idea. It's about using our words skillfully to redirect a situation's energy towards something more positive and harmonious. Yeah, it's like we're learning to be verbal ninjas or something, using our words to like disarm conflict and find peaceful solutions.
I love that image. It really ties back to that whole mindfulness thing, right? Being present in the moment, aware of what we're trying to say, and choosing our words carefully.
And this leads to a really interesting question that our sources bring up. What if? Like, what if we all made an effort to be more like that wise individual who helps people find common ground? Could we, actually create a more harmonious world one conversation at a time?
It's a beautiful thought, isn't it? It shows just how powerful even small acts of mindful communication can be, not just for our own relationships, but for our communities as a whole.
So we've talked about why mindful communication is so important and some practical steps to, actually make it happen. But I'm curious, have you ever, personally been in a situation where you had to choose between being honest and being kind? How did you deal with that?
Oh, definitely. I think we've all been there at some point. For me, it usually comes down to asking myself, what's the most compassionate and effective way to communicate in this specific situation? It's a balancing act, that's for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Our sources don't shy away from the fact that finding that balance can be tough, but they also seem to suggest that, it's a journey worth taking.
Totally. It's not about reaching some kind of perfect state of communication, but more about constantly trying to be more mindful, more compassionate, and more effective in how we interact with each other.
It's a journey of self-awareness, isn't it? Like
Yeah,
understanding the weight our words carry and realizing we have the power to build people up or tear them down.
you got it. And as we become more aware of our own communication habits, we can start to make conscious choices about how we want to show up in the world.
Makes me think about how often we might just say things without really stopping to think about the impact they might have. It's like we're on autopilot, reacting instead of responding thoughtfully.
That's where those practical steps from our sources come in handy, right? Pausing, reflecting, thinking about the other person, focusing on our goals, and choosing kindness. They give us a framework for being more intentional with our communication.
They're such valuable tools. And they remind us that we're not alone in this. We can all learn and grow as communicators, and by doing so, we can create a more positive and understanding world around us.
Absolutely. And speaking of resources that can support us on this journey, remember that book we mentioned earlier, 365 Daily Messages for You. It's full of practical wisdom for navigating life with more intention and kindness, and that includes those tricky communication situations. The link is in the episode description if you're interested.
It's a great resource for anyone who wants to dive deeper into these ideas. And now let's shift gears a bit and look at some more specific insights from our sources on how to deal with those really challenging situations where honesty and kindness seem to clash. So our sources actually dive into some really specific situations. And one that really jumped out at me was dealing with unsolicited advice. When someone's just venting about a problem and you're dying to offer a solution, even though they haven't actually asked for one.
Yeah, I've been there. It's such a common trap we fall into, right? We want to jump into fix-it mode without really listening to what the other person is going through.
Exactly. And what our sources suggest is that sometimes the best thing we can do is just listen with empathy, you know, just validate their feelings.
It's all about creating a space where they feel truly heard and understood. Sometimes offering advice, even if you mean well, can accidentally make them feel like you're dismissing their experience or like their feelings aren't valid.
It's like that saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes just being present and really listening is more valuable than any quick fix we might have up our sleeve.
100%. And that goes back to remembering who you're talking to and what they might be feeling. If someone's already overwhelmed or feeling vulnerable, a bunch of advice might just make them feel even more stressed.
Yeah, it's like pouring gasoline on a fire instead of putting it out with, understanding and support.
Exactly. Our sources really emphasize asking yourself, what does this person actually need right now? Maybe they just need a listening ear, a shoulder to cry on, or simply to know that their feelings are okay.
It's about meeting people where they are emotionally and offering the kind of support that truly resonates with what they're going through.
You got it. And sometimes that means holding back on the advice and just being there with empathy and a willingness to listen.
Now, our sources also touch on this tricky thing about receiving criticism gracefully. Like, nobody loves hearing negative feedback, but they suggest there are ways to make those conversations more constructive.
Yeah, it's about shifting your mindset, right? Instead of getting defensive, try to be curious. So instead of immediately shutting down the feedback, maybe ask some clarifying questions, try to see things from their perspective, and maybe even find some truth in what they're saying that can help you grow.
It's a good reminder that even criticism, when it's given thoughtfully, can actually be a chance to learn and improve.
Totally. And it goes back to pausing and reflecting. Instead of reacting right away, take a moment to let the feedback sink in, consider if it holds any truth, and then decide how you want to respond.
It's like hitting the pause button on your emotions and letting your rational mind take over so you can navigate the situation better.
You nailed it. It might not be easy at first, but with practice, we can all learn to handle criticism with more grace and an open mind.
So we've covered listening with empathy, offering support that fits the other person's needs, and taking criticism gracefully. Those are just a few examples of how we can actually put mindful communication into practice in our daily lives.
And remember, it's an ongoing process, not something you achieve overnight. We're all going to stumble along the way. But the key is to keep trying, keep being more mindful and compassionate, and keep working towards communicating more effectively.
It's about progress, not perfection, right? And even those baby steps in the right direction can have a ripple effect, leading to more positive and harmonious interactions in our relationships and our communities.
Couldn't agree more. And
Yeah.
speaking of things that can help us on this journey, remember that book we mentioned, 365 Daily Messages for You. It's packed with daily wisdom and inspiration for living a more mindful and fulfilling life. And it even touches on how to handle communication challenges. You can find the link in the episode description.
It's a fantastic resource for anyone who wants to explore these ideas further and continue to sharpen their communication skills.
This deep dive has uncovered some really insightful stuff about truth and communication.
Yeah, we've learned that it's not always about black and white honesty. It's about striking that balance between truth and kindness, being aware of how our words affect others, and using communication to make our relationships and the world around us a little bit better.
And if you enjoyed this conversation, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts and experiences with us in the comments. Tell us how you handle those tricky situations where truth and kindness seem to clash.
And remember, this journey toward becoming more mindful communicators is something we're all in together. We're all learning, growing, and trying to create a more positive and understanding world through our interactions.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We're excited to explore more fascinating topics with you in our next episode. Until then, keep those conversations flowing, and remember, choose kindness.
And thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.